The views and comments expressed on the following radio program by its hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect the views of RMCOnAir.com or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Knowledge of self.
Radio.
Knowledge of self.
Radio.
Knowledge of self.
Radio.
Knowledge of self.
Peace, peace. Welcome to Knowledge of Self Radio. I'm the God Jarulullah, and I'm going to let my brothers introduce themselves.
Peace. Jakil Knowledge Allah.
Peace, Teray Allah.
Yeah, so peace. We have a great show for you today. The actual title of today's show is The Social Effects of Social Media. So basically with this show, we want to strive to give y'all more of a clear understanding of how social media actually can affect your mental and physical power. So yeah, we're gonna definitely deal with that today. This show is actually brought to you by Global Position Solutions. Before we get into the meat of the show, I wanted to give y'all some of our contacts where you can reach us. You can definitely reach us on Facebook.com /KOS.radio show. Also YouTube.com/KOS9 radio. Definitely subscribe to that because we plan on putting together some videos and things that go a little bit more in depth as it relates to nutrition and maybe some exercise videos going forward. So take some time and jump on there.
Yeah.
Also Twitter at KOS Radio 123. So let's go ahead and get into some of these current events.
Indeed, indeed. So, peace. I'm going to hit you guys with the first current event. It's a very interesting one. So you have a mother in North Texas basically walks in on her 15-year-old son getting, I can't think of a nice way to say that. Basically, he's getting oral from his 18-year-old cousin at the time, both males. So the mother walks in on that and proceeds to kind of whoop him, discipline him with a extension cord. So anyway, the grandmother, now this is interesting, the grandmother takes the child down to the hospital, which is probably what sets it off, although Child Protection Services never show up to the lady's house. And to this day, even though the case is still in trial, there's no trial date except for this case, the son is still living with the mother.
Wow.
Yeah, but so she, instead of taking a plea, which would have gave her, I want to say, a year of parole, she decided to fight it based on some of her church seniors or officials decided, hey, you have the right to discipline your child. Mm-hmm. And in Texas, spanking your child, things like that aren't illegal as they are in California, let's say.
Kind of puts a twist on corporal punishment. So whipping the child with an extension cord. So basically, we don't have the right to discipline our children.
No, not well, in Texas you do.
Right.
In California, at least, that's the place I'm most familiar with. I know in California, you discipline your child. You spank them on the butt. That could get you in trouble.
Right.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So was she original or?
Yeah, she's an original woman. And her argument, she was like, I walked in and I saw this going on in my own house. how else was I supposed to respond?
Right.
Right. And to put a twist to it, it would be interesting. What if a young lady was involved in that? Would it still be the same punishment? And I'm pretty sure it would be, because also when you're thinking about someone else's child, you're thinking about a daughter, but since it was a relative, it's a bit different.
Right.
It's
I
a
think
little
that's
bit
what
deeper.
really sets it off is
Right.
not necessarily what was happening, but also that's your cousin. You know what I mean? Like,
It's crazy, man.
I also got another current event for you guys. We got Jason Collins, the NBA basketball player, coming out as being the first black or African American professional athlete to come out while still being in the NBA. And not only that, he receives a phone call from Mr. Obama himself, congratulating him on being such.
Right. And go ahead. President.
No, I mean, it's just, you know, everywhere you look is really a homosexual push in our communities. You know, obviously we live in Los Angeles, or I live in Los Angeles. You brothers still live in California and, you know, surrounding areas. But everywhere you look as it relates to the billboard, you see, you know, basically, when it comes to homophobia, look at it as a negative. Which I'm not saying people should run around being scared of homosexuals, but why do we need those types of billboards in our communities? Why can't we have billboards like, let's fight hunger?
Right.
Let's deal with this you know, I guess.
Or stop selling drugs, or
Yeah, like, I mean,
end gang violence, or
all
build
the
a better community. I could think of hundreds of other things that you could write on a billboard. And
Right. And in terms of newsworthy events, is aside from the fact that President Obama made a phone call, is that really newsworthy that someone came out? Every time someone comes out, and you can think of several celebrities over the past who have, it's always newsworthy. Yet at the same time, people talk a lot about, well, what a person does in their private life is
right,
private life,
right,
but it becomes broadcasted, so it sends a mixed message.
Right.
You know, in essence, why don't we broadcast some relationships that are going really well, especially among original people? And you know, we know that 1 out of 3 households are headed by single black women. So that's a statistic in the United States. So we're talking about 33% of households in the United States are being run by single black women.
Wow.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, what does a person's sexual preference have to do with basketball? Why is it, you know?
Especially someone who's not getting playing time.
Right. Like, you know.
What's the last All-Star game that dude showed up in? I'm just saying.
Maybe in the crowd as a, you know,
Spectating, he had good seats.
Right.
Great seats.
Well, Cinco de Mayo, let's have a brief talk, ladies and gentlemen. Most of us, when we come up in the United States, we think that Cinco de Mayo is the Mexican Independence Day. Well, actually, it commemorates the Battle of Puebla, where the Mexicans defeated the French forces. And in actuality, they didn't expel the French until 1867. Now, the true Mexican Independence Day, which is largely celebrated by Mexico, is in September the 16th. So that we understand, if you're going to be a Mexican for a day and get drunk, try to just read up a little bit and make sure you understand what the holiday is about. There was another thing that kind of bothered me, excuse me, and it's just this whole idea. We know that the fight was last night, but I've noticed over recent years that there always tends to be a boxing match around Cinco de Mayo between what we would consider, we call them knowledge seeds, but what would be classified as a darker original man with what we refer to as a brown seed, or in this case, what many of you refer to as a Mexican American or a Mexican. So I just kind of think that, you know, it creates this racial tension, as far as I know. just the discussion that comes out of who is the better man, it becomes a racial discussion as opposed to who's the better fighter. And this is a constant thing that I've been seeing over the last few years, how they always find, two of our people to fight each other and duke it out close to these holidays.
Even that applies even when you look at like the news when they talk about anything that happens in prison. You hear riots, and generally the majority of what you hear regarding riots is black and brown.
No doubt. Yeah, that's a good point. You never hear about the black and white riots or anything like that. It's always black and brown, black and brown.
Right. So since this is a white male-dominated society, the message is always it's us against them. It's the so-called African Americans against the so-called Mexican Americans or Mexicans. So I think that's something that we really need to resolve within our own communities. The danger of investing in those types of events.
And that's why the devil calls our people African.
True indeed. No doubt about it.
Okay, so we're going to get into our first break, but when we come back, we'll get into the meat of the show. So peace.
Dude, peace.
Peace. Welcome back to Knowledge of Self Radio. I'm Jarul Allah.
Peace, Jakil Allah.
Peace, Terrell.
Yeah, so before we went to the break, we were basically just building on some current events, but now we can go ahead and get into the meat of the show. Basically, before we get into that, I want to give the call-in number, which is 323-965-1600. So the quote for today is by an individual by the name of David Armerland. And the quote is, "Social media is addictive precisely because it gives us what the real world lacks. It gives us immediacy, direction, a sense of clarity, and value as an individual." So, that pretty much covers what we're striving to, go through in this show. So some of today's questions, first and foremost, is how does social media affect relationships? Should employers be allowed to access your social media sites? What are the positive effects of social networks? How is the government threatening electronic privacy? What are some of the key ways we can keep our privacy private? What are the dangers of social networks for children and teenagers? How does social media distract you from what is really going on in the world, i.e. Facebook games grew in participation while unemployment was on the rise, which that's very interesting, and I know Jakil is going to drop some hot fire about that. How are your cell phones used to enforce law, and how does social media and cell phone affect your health? So,
what? Cell phone affects our health?
What? Yeah. So we're going to deal with that. So we have some references. What we'll do is actually put those on the Facebook, so you can jump on there and check those out later on. When we look at social media, which is topic number one, I was looking up the word social, and the actual root of social comes from a Latin term, socii. And that term means allies. So it got me to thinking, when you look at like Facebook, how many people in our friends list could we say are allies? If something really got tough, where we needed help, we needed an ally, how many people on our friends list could we call? Maybe 5% of those people,
maybe if we're lucky. If we're lucky,
right?
If we can actually find the number on the Facebook page.
Right. And I think more importantly is how many of those people are your business associates, as opposed to you just looking at people's photos? how many of those people are you really networking with to try to rise to the top of your profession or do things of that nature?
Right.
So what does social mean to us? Social means to be equal in everything, right? So how are we equal in social media? And I think that's something that it would be really good to talk about at some point, during the show.
Yeah. So the first, basically, we're going to start out with social media and its effects on relationships. So, how do y'all see that?
Well, okay.
Well, I mean, I'll add on because, like you were saying,
There you go.
how many people could you really call? Saying if something went down, I think, and that quote, man, that was money. Because, a friend, because, this is what you're adding on Facebook, right? You're adding friends. People you can trust and call on.
Right.
Like at 2 a.m, like, yo, man, I need some help. Or I need someone to talk to. A friend, right? So people got 900 of these people, 1,000 sometimes of these people that they can call at 2 a.m. Yeah, I don't think that's true.
Right.
So the thing that ends up happening is you interact or so-called interact with people, but it's on a real surface-based level.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you never really develop a friendship. You don't know when that person's birthday is outside of it coming up on your Facebook as a reminder.
Right.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And how often are you going to actually see some of the people that you communicate with on any of these social media sites in person?
Right.
And so it creates this very indirect and impersonal relationship between people. And so it's kind of like another arm for Hollywood. You can create a fantasy even about how you look.
Yep.
You can show the cleanest side of your car that doesn't have that big ass dent in it. So you could do quite a few things on Facebook.
Or your friend's car that's fresh.
Or your good side. You take the pictures on the good side. Always the same exact picture,
Right.
It's like,
You got that good angle.
Yeah. So I think the social media is kind of like a fairy tale land, It's like one of those places people can go and not necessarily show their weaknesses, and they get pleasure out of it.
I wanted to share a brief quote from the Pew Research Center, and it shows that 67% of online adults in the United States, they use social networking sites. So if you're out and about and you tend to socialize, clubs, restaurants, or you just go to social gatherings, you're going to notice that there are some people that really use social media to hide behind. So at some point, for some of us, it's really hard for them to communicate with people face to face. So it does kind of reduce the closeness, or at least the idea of socializing. It kind of blurs that reality between us if we're always on the computer and communicating with people, as opposed to talking to people in person.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially when you think about, we've communicated face to face for hundreds of years, right?
Right.
To get to the point where we're at now. Now we're not doing that. So how is that going to affect us down the line?
Right. I would say, you need human interaction and the mix with other people. And you see it in the jail system, right? When they put a person in solitary confinement for long periods of time, that messes with the person's mental.
Right, and maybe some of the viewing audience, I know I've seen it somewhere, but if you look into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Jaquil was just spitting what's basic psychology about the fact that you need nurturing as a human being, and that comes from communication and actually your sense of touch and closeness with people.
Interesting.
Right.
And they give you that kind of fake sense of nurturing or importance when you post something on Facebook and you get 10, 55 people to like it. You're like, oh man, I'm important. Look at me.
Right.
I mean, you get some followers on Twitter, or what's the other one? Instagram.
Right.
I mean, like another follower. Ooh, they like my picture.
What would be some of the negative things that you guys have seen outside of relationships in terms of social media? Anything that kind of came out in your research?
I think when you look at the negativity, it gets very polarized on the social media. like, for example, you see videos like, twerk videos or whatever like that. You know,
What's twerk?
yeah, it's some sort of dance. I
Right.
mean, you know, I'm not too familiar with it, but basically, yeah. So it's like young kids, little girls doing these videos, and you know, they get a bunch of views.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost reinforcing these negative, you know, actions and things of that nature. So, you know, I think that's harmful. You know?
And since you brought up the whole idea of negativity, and then also we got to go into the violence, all right? Because a big discussion that came out, and I know we kind of talked about the idea of bullying, and that's been in the news. There have been conferences and films devoted to the subject, but cyberbullying would be another negative impact that social media is having, especially on our young people. And I could say, just as an educator, there was at least one massive girl fight at our school that started from a posting on Facebook. And, you know, the fact that they have access to their cell phones also intensifies this type of communication. But one thing that I would ask everyone to look into is an ABC report. It's titled "Chicago's Gang Violence Fueled Through Social Media." It's a really short interview with a member of the community, a young man, who's kind of talking about how social media is used to fuel some of the violence that takes place in Chicago. And for those of you who don't know, Chicago had 500 murders last year. So that's an extremely high murder rate.
Chicago, huh?
Chicago.
Don't we all
is
know someone very
gunning each
important
other.
who lives in Chicago? President or something from Chicago.
Oh, is he?
Oh.
Wow.
Yes.
But he went to
interesting.
Sandy Hook, right? How many died at Sandy Hook? Was it 20 something?
20-something, 6, something like that.
Okay.
Many
He can't
died
go
in
he
Chicago.
can't go home for 500, but okay. That's crazy.
That is interesting.
And that exceeds, that exceeds the number of days in a year. It's 365 days in a year, y'all. So
More than
that's
one person
500
is
murders.
divided.
Right.
And not to downplay what happened in Sandy Hook, but just to look at the separation in the numbers. You got 500 plus people dying, which also, oddly enough, a lot of places are gun-free zones. Which, how are these people dying from gunshot wounds at a gun-free zone?
Wow.
Just
Right.
boggles my mind.
Wow.
I didn't even.
The thing that came out, a really positive thing out of the degree of violence in Chicago, there's a gentleman by the name of, saying his name right, Brian Cross, who actually started something called the 500 campaign through Facebook and Twitter. And he asked people to send in headshots. And of course, next to the headshot, once he edited them, he would put a certain caption talking about exactly how much violence was committed in Chicago within a certain frame of time. And apparently the police there have acknowledged that it has in some way decreased the amount of violence. But I think we all know that it begins in the streets and then it winds up in social media, but sometimes it does start in social media and winds up in the streets.
Right.
Yeah. I think the thing about social media is that there's no body language to actually, see what a person is really expressing. They say body communication is like 70% body language. So if that's the case, in social media you have no body language, so you're getting what, 30%?
Right.
You
You're missing a large part of what that person's trying to tell you.
Exactly. So there's going to be a lot of gaps and things missed, and then that's going to lead to chaos and confusion, which we see every day. So.
Right, and that's why, especially Jarul, many of us, when we build, we don't like to build through text or online. So, I think some of the guys and nurses out there could confirm that building with someone on a degree online is extremely difficult,
Yeah, I think that's another thing. You got people on Facebook who, profess to be, revolutionaries or profess to be highly intelligent and this and that. All they're doing is copy and pasting little quotes that they get offline or whatever, So I think that's dangerous also because, like I said, people are like setting themselves up to be something that they're really not, So that's another component that's really getting out of hand.
What's that?
Just people who profess to be something that they're not on Facebook and all these different, online outlets and stuff like that.
That's Hollywood.
No doubt.
It's Hollywood in its finest.
I think that's a good contrast in the story. You know, at one event you have people who talk about it, and then you have people who maybe are on that same social media who are posting pictures about them being about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you do have a contrast, I guess, of good and evil.
Right.
To use for lack of a better word to use. But, you got people who are like, I'm power to the people and, this and that about the police and da-da-da. And then you have the person who's like, power to the people. And here I built a farm. And
Right.
I started an after-school program. Here's
like a
pictures of the
pacifier,
kids.
It's like a pacifier. You got these individuals who may, if under the right circumstances, go out and do some revolutionary type acts. But the Facebook is all they need to voice their, mode of expression or how they feel about certain different things, and that's all they need. They don't need to go out and actually, walk what they talk.
Right.
But yeah, so let's move on. We're going to get into another break, but once we get back, we'll get more into electronic privacy and the U.S. government. Peace.
Yeah, peace.
Peace. Welcome back to Knowledge of Self Radio. I'm Jarul Allah.
Peace. Jakil Allah.
Teray Allah. Peace.
Yeah, so before we got into the break, we were building on social media. As we move on, we're going to get into electronic privacy versus the U.S. government. And I know my man Jakil right here has got some heat for y'all. So,
yeah, there's a big thing going on as far as from small levels, as far as like your employer wanting access to your Facebook account, your Twitter account, to bigger levels where you have companies, sometimes Google, which they're shaky, but in any event, going to war with the government, saying they're not going to give people's personal data up in their fight for you to keep that. To where you have other companies like AT&T, for example, who, when the government was like, "Yeah, we want their data," and they were like, "Okay, yeah, sure, here, take it," right, with no fight at all. So it's a real hot topic and touchy. And then you have the passing of the CISPA, which really kind of forwards that agenda of being able to have full access to your data at any given time without you being able to deny them access to that and without your knowledge.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about that is that, there's really no, I guess, physical way to see what a person's thinking, by hooking something up directly to their brain and that projecting. I mean, they're working on it, but it's not.
Well, so here's the interesting thing. And I meant to find that article. It was actually a video that I saw. And you had the CEO of Google, and unprompted, without anyone asking him any questions, he said, yeah, basically at any time, Google knows more about you than you know about yourself.
Right. Yeah,
between Gmail, Google Maps, and another Google product that they have, he goes, we basically know what you're thinking before you're thinking it, where you're going to be, where you're at.
Right.
It was deep.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the social media and, things on the internet related to Google and stuff like that, it's just a way that people can actually, or the government can actually see what you're thinking.
Trying to capture your mind.
Exactly.
Right. And I know one of my good brothers, he's studying at Stanford. He did this lesson with my students about filter bubbles. So how that was explained is when you log on to the internet on certain sites and they say, they may have videos, like videos will appear, and they base what you look at regularly on the internet, and they try to match what you would be interested in consuming or watching later. So it is just like tapping into, I guess, your personality, so to speak. So they're going to put all types of stuff on there.
Right.
And you can see it in your email too. I hate to keep using Google as an example, but I'm sure the majority of people have it. If you notice, things that you start searching for will show up in your inbox on those advertisements on the side.
Right.
Right. So if you start looking for a bunch of martial art things, you're all of a sudden to see karate schools and advertisements to buy nunchucks and ninja stars. You know what I mean?
Right.
No doubt. They definitely do that. And part of that is, Google, again, it's just a great example. Back in the day when they first came around, because a lot of people just think Google always was. There was a time where, at least me, myself personally, I know a lot of my friends who were into the internet, computer stuff, we weren't using Google. I mean, we kind of like anti-Google, like, yo, Google's crap. The reality is Google actually had to go to trial because their Spider, which is what they call the web crawler, right? So web Spider, funny, right? So the Spider is pretty much like a virus in the sense that it just searches the whole internet for everything, and anything that's on the internet definitely will find.
Wow.
So deep to the point to where you can unplug your computer from the internet, make a website, plug your computer back to the internet, load it through your browser, and then search for it on Google, and Google will find it.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you, because we were building about this before, what happens to all those nasty pictures and nasty messages that maybe your significant other is not supposed to get through email? Well, after you erase those things in your inbox or your outbox, do they erase
or any kind
permanently?
Of sent box for some people who be slipping. I'm not trying to give you clues on how to get around, cheating on your significant other. But if you're a spy or something, make sure you delete your sent items too, because it's not just your outbox and your inbox. Right. In any event,
do they ever disappear?
Nah, those things never really disappear. Back to the classic example, if you go to AT&T back in I want to say early 2000, late 90s, the government was doing the whole thing like, we want access to all that stuff. So they wanted to plug a box in that goes from everything that they get from their computers gets sent out to data centers. This is how kind of the internet works. So it's not necessarily localized at one place. Everyone's sharing information, and kind of the in-between points are data centers, big centers that house all this data and passing information back and forth, right? So for one, the government intercepts a lot of those data coming out of AT&T, coming out of Verizon, goes into their own special box where they store that data. Not only that, but they get sent to data centers, right, where they sit on large computers that are just accessible. I mean, if you're swift with Google, I'm not going to tell you guys how to do it, but if you're swift with Google, you can definitely search for anything you want to search for, as far as passwords from Excel. Yeah, and all Google is doing is querying databases that have this data.
And it's all your information, your personal information. So I think it's good for us to talk a little bit about electronic privacy. And I have brought something in today. We did some research on what's going on with the National Council of State Legislature. And there's a bill, and I'm speaking on California, it's a bill titled AB 25. And basically it was on the heels of this Supreme Court decision titled Jones versus the Supreme Court about electronic privacy. And essentially what this bill is prohibiting employers from doing is, accessing or getting or asking employers for any information that they may put on social networks. But of course, it does depend on which corporation you work for. Because if you're working for a place like
some government,
federal government, right, they want access to make sure you're not a security threat. But then what does that say about the rest of us and our privacy? So what is private and what's not private was the thing that kind of came up to my mind in terms of employers. What are some things that employers should know, and what are some of the things that they should not know?
See, my point of view on that is kind of twisted. I came back in the day, being, again, when you got down with computers kind of the way that I did. you just want freedom of information. You know what I mean? And you don't really want to be limited to. You can't tell me no. I can't know about that. I want that information is information and it doesn't belong to anyone. That being said, I would say if you want to keep it private, don't put it online.
Bottom line.
That's the bottom line.
Right.
Anything as soon as you put it online, you know it's not private anymore. Just like if you walk outside and someone wants to take pictures of you, that person is in full right to take pictures of you because you're now on public property. If you didn't want to be taken pictures of, go inside. He can't. They have that right to do that.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on a little bit. So how do you think all of the social media outlets affect the youth? The children, and even I guess the next generation coming up to fill our seats.
Okay, so
you
right.
being an educator,
okay.
we know you got a whole lot for them.
Okay, so
yeah, how do you see the effect in that?
And it affects literacy skills.
Okay.
So those of you who are teenagers, because it's not spelled BECUZ, it is spelled BECAUSE.
How do you spell the?
THA. If you are constantly on social media.
Or TEH.
Right. I mean, I appreciate the fact that they've created a new language, so to speak.
Okay.
However, and there are some studies out there from professors and just people in the literacy world where they're saying that type of writing is transferring over into what would be considered academic writing. Okay, and we just administered the Casey, and I can say that when I looked at some of the students' essays, we can't intervene and say, hey, that's wrong, you have to erase that, by law. But there were some words in their essays, and I said to myself, man, why are you writing an essay like that? But they're so trained into doing that. So it's like a form of hypnotism, like anything goes with that type of writing through social media.
I remember taking English back in the day. My teacher, she told me something very cool. She said, the way you speak and the way you write are two different things in English. And it almost seems like now what's happening is the way people speak is also the same way they write. And
I was told that too, brother.
Okay.
No doubt.
Okay, so we both had good English teachers.
We did. He said, you can't write the way you speak. I was like, what?
Right. Yeah, another thing that's interesting about, that whole thing is that, at least with us, we saw both sides. Like, we came up in an era where there were no cell phones, there was no social media. And now we're seeing the other side of it. So we can, we have something to base, like, reality on versus this dream world that people are living in. But the youth, they don't have that, So how do you see, I guess, the personal relationships with the youth? I know me personally, when I go out, I'll see people like, two people out, they may be on a date, but not communicating with each other, both either on the phone texting each other or texting other people. I don't know.
What'd you say?
Right. It's like, it seems like there's a disconnect between the social component of, face-to-face communication. And
right.
I think that's troublesome,
I think one of the negative effects of social media on young people is that very few adults around them have a conversation with them and tell them what information they should not put on their social media sites. And that's a really big thing. There are a lot of people who have children who are, giving these timelines, all these photos, and basically you're informing someone that gains access to your your Facebook, your Twitter, or whatever it is. So basically, if they ever meet you in person, they'll know so much about you and have never spoken with you before. So I think it's important, as far as the negative impact, is that young people need to be taught how to use these tools and what information they should not make public. Even though they have, the private option, there are still people hacking into all of these sites.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and move on a little bit. We're gonna go ahead and get into how social media could be used for a benefit or used for educational purposes.
I think a good way of doing that is kind of, I think, where we would going with that previous conversation, in some research that I was doing, if you allow kids who are, let's say, all in the same math class to all join up online, and then you allow kids who maybe have that same math class in Oklahoma and Wyoming and New York and wherever, and they all can link up and kind of exchange ideas about how they're dealing with math. Okay, now that's a benefit, right? Because now you're actually exchanging information with someone. You can test it out, and then you're going to go share that information out with other people around you in your own social network, right? As opposed to where you just allow people to get online and talk about nothing and madness, and that's kind of what they give back out to their own social network.
Right. Yeah, another thing,
you kind of have that disconnect then between people, and then kind of like you're saying, people are out on a date and they're all up in their cell phones talking about what they're doing on the date instead of actually experiencing
right. Or checking their social media site.
Right. What they're doing on the date.
Yeah, and I think another thing, what I find interesting is a lot of people who have their independent businesses, but you wouldn't know about that if you looked at their Facebook.
Right.
They never talk about what they're doing as it relates to business, what their service is, none of that type of thing. So, I feel like there's a lot of wasted time on the social media. I mean, it could be used definitely for useful things, but I think a lot of time is wasted on there,
Right. Just like you had the the revolution that went off based on Twitter, and then they had to shut down Twitter because
in Egypt.
Right.
They
didn't want people tweeting all that useful information.
Now, is it my understanding that Obama has the ability to shut down the internet now whenever he feels the need to?
Yeah, an internet czar that he put in place, and basically he just pushes the button and shut down the internet for America.
Wow, that's interesting. All right, so we're gonna go into our last break, and then when we get back, we'll tie up the show, and we'll build a little bit more with you. Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Welcome back to Knowledge of Self Radio. I'm Jarul Allah.
Peace. Jakil Allah.
Peace. Teray Allah.
So yeah, we were building a little bit about social media before we went to break. Now we're going to get into cell phones. So I know Jakil wanted to build about what is done with the things you say and do on your mobile devices. I know he touched on it briefly, but if you got anything else to add on as it relates to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, basically, it works very similar to the same way that your home computer would work. Just to add on, though, if you're using it at like a Starbucks, people who are very swift with computers can steal certain data off your machine while you're just surfing in these wide open areas like that. So definitely, like Trey was saying, be careful of what you're doing and where you're doing it at. Because once you put your information online, it's open game pretty much. Although I would say there are some things, I don't know if you guys want to build on that, there are some things that you can use to kind of keep your data a little bit more safe. One thing you can do is you can go to startpage.com, and that basically is going to function just like Google. You can search for anything that you want to do. The difference is that no one stores your information, right? So your IP address isn't stored. And so, that way if someone's trying to search you based on, where that IP address came from, when they go to look at Start Page in their servers, they're not going to know where to go routed to because none of that information is saved.
Okay, so startpage.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Cool. All right, so we're going to get into some of the negative health effects of cell phones. One thing that I wanted to definitely build on was a study that I looked at by an individual by the name of Rodney Croft. He's from the Brain Science Institute and Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. Basically, he did a exercise or a study where he tested whether cell phone transmissions could alter a person's brain waves. So when you go back to one of the shows we did about, basically how television affects your brain and the certain waves, and it changes, the way that your actual brain functions, you'll see a little bit more in depth about what the waves actually, or the different waves actually, I guess, relate to. But for this, we're going to just build specifically about alpha waves. So with alpha waves, it says that, your cell phone can put your brain in an alpha wave state.
Wow.
And obviously with the alpha wave state, it's a reduced mental effort, and it puts your brain in cortical idling. So it's like
cortical idling.
Yeah, you're like, your brain's on screensaver basically.
Right.
So it's basically,
that sounds bad, right?
Yes,
Cortical
it does.
idling. Yeah, I do not want that.
Right. So I found that interesting because most people, they walk around with their cell phone, they have it in their hand, they're constantly checking it. So
Right.
as soon as you put that thing near you, automatically you go right into that alpha state. And it's basically, puts you in a zombie state of mind.
No doubt. I totally see that. I had a phone. I remember when they first came out, the phones that flipped, that had the keyboard. I just always had to have that phone in my hand, and I was always just open it up just because I could open up my phone and kind of look at it. Even with the phone I have now, I find myself kind of like, wow, my screen looks really nice. And I'll just close it. Nothing's changed on it.
Another thing I found interesting was that when you go into an alpha state, that's basically when you stop paying attention to your external world and pay more attention to the internal. So when you deal with things from a social standpoint, of course, that's going to affect your social skills because you're going to be more self-centered. You're going to be worried more about yourself as opposed to your environment, what may be going on, say, in Africa, what may be going on in, the Middle East and all these other different areas. All you're going to be focusing on is yourself and what's going on with you, So I thought that was interesting. Even more interesting, when you look at cell phones, and you can go back to another show where we built about population control, that's another means of population control. When you hear it, you're like, okay, here we go with these conspiracies again, right?
No, I can see that.
Yeah, but when you look at the cell phone, the radiation that's given off by the cell phone can lower your sperm count. There's been various studies, you can Google, and there's various studies of how cell phones lower your sperm count. So obviously, if your sperm count's lowered, the chances of you having children and procreating is limited also.
Right.
Right, and the first time that I heard that, it was a former student of mine. Her name's Maria. And I had, when we used to wear the cell phones on our hips, and she said, "Mister, you shouldn't wear that on your hip." I was like, "Why?" She said, "Because it'll lower your sperm count." I was like, "What?"
Right.
And so here's a high school student who told me that, and I said, "Well, where am I supposed to put it?" She said, "You should put it in your pocket," but she said, "You should also turn it off." And I said, "Where did you get this from?" And then she kind of went into a brief discussion about the femur and radiation in your cell phone. So, I'm glad that God is building on this because a lot of us don't know. Basically, you don't want to wind up shooting blanks. I hate to put it that way.
Right.
But yeah.
And the thing reality. Is, I tell people this, and a lot of them are like, well, I don't want to have children anyway. Okay, that's cool. But also, it's been linked to actually shrink the size of your actual, your area.
Right.
So
nobody's trying to have that happen.
Nobody wants that, So it's linked to that.
That goes back to the excuse of, I just got the swimming pool. Right? Yeah, no one wants that.
Right.
I can see that.
So it can actually shrink the size, and then it can, obviously affect the performance of,
Oh, that's even worse because then you can't even use the whole motion in the ocean.
So it's just jamming you up,
attacking you from so many different areas.
And speaking of conspiracies, as we all want to say, right? If you take a look at a CNN report, it's CNN Health. The World Health Organization had brought out a report where they examined a group of people beginning in 2010, and they examined about 13,000 people. And what they deduced from that experiment was that, radioactivity is from the cell phone is attributing to certain types of cancer, namely brain cancer. So although there's one group of scientists who I think were hired by the cell phone companies are refuting that claim, the argument is that we haven't